Welcome to the Free Cities podcast. My name is Timothy Allen, and this is the official podcast of the Free Cities Foundation. Hello, and welcome to episode number 28 of the Free Cities podcast. This week I'm back in Warsaw, and I'm having a conversation with a Polish gentleman by the name of Marek Tatała. Now, Marek is the VP of the Economic Freedom Foundation, which is a Polish grant-giving organisation in a similar vein to Atlas Network. Alongside funding relevant projects, they also work on advocacy and political lobbying, believing in any way that bridges can be built to help integrate free market and classical liberal ideals into general society. Our discussion revolves around the work of the Foundation, and we touch upon many related subjects, including the decentralization of nation-states, Polish political trends, global free market success stories, and whether or not membership to the EU is a net benefit or not. Anyway, I hope you enjoy our conversation. Next week, I'll be diving into a series of conversations I had in the Montelibero community in Montenegro. So look out for those, and in the meantime, just sit back, as always, and relax, and enjoy my conversation with Marek Tatała. Before we start, though, what's the history of this building? Do you know much about it? Is it? It's a very lovely old building we're in here.
It's definitely pre-Second World War, so it was not destroyed during the war. I guess it survived as some other buildings on the street, and now it's privately owned by Irish investor, I think. So,
but we're in the district here where you get embassies and things like that. Is that right? I just noticed when we got out the cab here. It seems like it's my first time to Warsaw, so I'm trying to get my bearings a little bit.
We are at the same street as Polish Parliament. If you walk 200 meters forward from our office, there is a Polish Parliament there, and also there is headquarters of the biggest opposition party next door on the other side of the street. So this is a very political street.
Right. Well, that might be a good segue into what you're doing then, because can you just explain to me, you're the VP of the Economic Freedom Foundation, is that right?
Yes.
What is the Economic Freedom Foundation first?
It's the new foundation created in 2021. In the past, I worked in a think tank called Civil Development Forum, created by Leszek Balcerowicz, very famous Polish reformer. And then I moved to Economic Freedom Foundation. Actually, the founder of this organization, Arkadiusz Muś, who is a successful entrepreneur, he was looking for the CEO of his new organization, which is this foundation, and I decided to take this job. We are a hub for other groups in Poland, so we are grant-giving organization. People, organizations, NGOs, foundations, associations can apply for grants, money to us, and we support their projects. But we also try to build bridges and integrate free market and classical liberal libertarian society here, because we notice that people sometimes don't talk to each other. I think this is my examples that I am showing very often. Brian Kaplan was coming to Poland, and one organization was publishing his books, and the other invited him, and they didn't know, like one organization didn't know about this visit. So we want to make sure that everyone knows when people like Brian Kaplan or some other, US authors are coming here, but we would also like people to know about their projects so they can promote each other and they can maximize, benefits.
Why is there that disconnect then between libertarian organizations, I suppose you would call it, would you? Or liberty-orientated organizations in Poland? Why is there a disconnect?
I think many of these groups are, we can call semi-professional or volunteer-based. They just don't have also enough time to communicate with each other. Majority of people involved in liberty-oriented organizations in Poland, they have other jobs. Being in the organization is not their job. They do it for free and volunteer basis. We are the exception. Like I am paid here. Like it's my job, and my staff here that you met, these are also employees of the foundation. But so we have resources to do these connections, also to invest in communication. Another observation was that there is a lot of great research, but the communication was not strong point of the liberty movement. So we would like to invest more in communication, not only traditional media, social media, but also speaking to politicians. It is why we decided to have office at the same street as Polish Parliament, to do lobbying for liberty, to promote liberty, rule of law, classical liberal values among politicians on the other side of the street.
So when you fund projects, is it just Polish projects that you're funding?
At the moment, yes. We mostly focus on Polish projects. We are a bit like Atlas Network, which is the global network of free market oriented groups, but just for Poland. So we offer grants, but we try to do more. We don't only give money. I am very often involved later in the projects that they do. If they do conference, I speak there. If they write some research or report, and this is my area of interest, I try to contribute as well. We advise them in the area of communication. In the future, we hope also to do more trainings in the areas like communication or fundraising, which is very important for these groups. And we also try not to make them dependent on us. So we are encouraging to find also other sources of financing for their projects, so they don't build this dependency on just one donor.
And give me a sense of the kind of projects. Are we talking give me a sense of what was your favorite project, for example, or your the one you're most excited or most interested in?
I think something that is not very typical for Liberty Movement is the YouTube program. This is the travel program. So the guy who is doing it, he's traveling around the world, but he's speaking about not only the architecture or tourist topics, but also about economic history of the countries and the sources of successes or failures. And we sponsored episodes about United Kingdom, and they will be present soon.
What was his name, out of interest?
Wojciech Siryk.
Right, I've been in contact with him.
Yeah,
the problem, I wanted to interview him because it's a fascinating project. I've got a feeling his English isn't quite up. Is that right? I spoke to someone and I thought maybe it wouldn't necessarily work because I think his English isn't technical enough for a conversation with a fluent English speaker. I don't know, but tell me about that project then, because here's the sense of it that I got. He's traveling around. Is it his program is about booming places around the world? Is that right? Successful places around the world, and why that is? Is that?
Yes. And not only in Europe. I really liked his episodes about Botswana, for example. But he's looking at the places from the perspective of their economic successes and explain to the viewers what were the sources. And usually, if country was successful, it was because of free market policies, opening to trade, and open economic policies. And this is important because he attracts people who are interested about, going to Switzerland, Estonia, or UK. They are looking for travel channels. And then in the meantime, they can also hear a bit about economic policy. So this is just one example. But of course, we also have very traditional projects like research projects. Today, actually, at the same time, there is a webinar of one of our partners and one big Polish newspaper about the project called Pensions for Freedom or of Freedom, like how to reform Polish pension system to make it more sustainable and to make it, survive, because with demographic conditions in Poland, we have aging population and not so many young people here. The reforms are needed to the pension system, and they will propose some recommendations to politicians. We hope at some point politicians will listen.
Well, what were they then, out of interest? That's interesting. So tell me what pensions were and what pensions should be according to this.
One thing that we should do in Poland is to equalize pension age. We still have this weird discrimination of males. So females have 60 years pension age and males 65. Actually, it should be different because females are living longer if we want to discriminate. But I think we should agree on like just system where both genders have the same pension age. And this is problem for women actually, because if they retire with very early, the Polish system works like this: you accumulate some money on your account, like it's not typical account, these are like written records, and then it is divided by the average length of life. And for women, this period is very long if they retire at the age of 60. So their pension will be very low. And some women say, okay, maybe in 61, 62, I can survive with this little money, maybe I can work something, but this is pension forever. So when you are 85, you also have this very little money from the government pension and maybe a small addition from private pension funds. This will be not enough to survive. So we would like to increase the pension age, also to consolidate our private pillars, because there are very different like opportunities to save for this private pillar of the pension. But this creates chaos. Like there are different systems, different rules, and we would like to make a clear system so that the person knows what is going on with the state, what should she or he invest in his future in private pension funds, to create also more transparent system.
Do you happen to know why women's pensions begin earlier than men's pensions? Why? How did that evolve?
I think probably it's heritage of socialist approach towards women, maybe thinking that women are kind of weaker and should retire earlier. Most of the countries in the EU have now equal age. What is more, Poland has the lowest pension age for women, 60 years old. This is now the lowest age in the EU. So, and we are not the wealthiest country in the EU, as you can imagine. So I don't think we can afford so big burden for also taxpayers, because we have something like minimum pension. If you don't save enough, you still receive minimum pension. So most of the women in the future will receive minimum pension, because otherwise, without this minimum pension law, their pension will be even lower. So we, as all taxpayers, will have to subsidize these very small pensions of a vast amount of women in Poland.
Can we? I want to go back to the previous project you were talking about, the film project, because, like I say, I really wanted to talk to this guy about this project because I thought it was really interesting. But I'm going to pick your brains on it. You know it relatively well, do you?
Yeah.
So describe to me one of the episodes which was a place that I probably don't know too much about, and that was a kind of economic success story, let's say.
I think this episode about Botswana is very interesting because, first of all, not so many people in Poland and probably even in Europe know a lot about Botswana. And it shows that, of course, it's not like typical liberal democratic free market policy of the European state, but they were doing some opening in the economy. They were doing some free market oriented reforms, and then it allowed them to be quite successful country in comparison to the rest of Africa, which is, I think, important also to understand this comparison, because sometimes we forget we are thinking about utopias and not really about the real environment where countries operate. And operating in Africa is much more difficult than being the member of the European Union here in Europe. But I think also the project is important because it opens topics related to free market to people out of free market bubble. We support some projects that are really free market bubbles. So the events that are attended by 90% of the attendees are free market followers already. And this is important to mobilize these people, to educate them even better, to stimulate their thinking in some direction. But we are now also looking for projects that are more like open in terms of potential audience. So something that can be interesting for people who don't read Hayek, Mises, Milton Friedman on day-to-day basis, but might be attracted to our ideas through other tools like travel documentaries. He is also planning more. Like I think now we are waiting for the episodes about United Kingdom, so it will be about the Industrial Revolution, about the history, why Britain was very successful country economically for many decades. He's also planning another trip to Asia. I think the next plan is Singapore, for example, which is country in the top of economic freedom rankings, both done by Fraser Institute or Heritage Foundation. And this will be, I think, really also interesting story, because Singapore is a very good case study where free market policies really work.
So he's a libertarian himself, is he? Or have you...
Yes, he has very free market views. Apart from doing travel videos, he has another channel where he does interviews with libertarians, with free market oriented politicians, with conservative politicians. So he's quite popular on YouTube on both channels.
So I like that you're saying that you need to reach out to people outside the free market bubble. And so number one, how do you best do that? And number two, give me an idea of other parts of society, culture, or whatever that you feel that there is a good way to reach out to people that don't know anything about this kind of stuff.
I think that libertarian, classical liberals in general can do better in reaching to some groups that are important but still not attracted to our ideas. One observation I have from attending a lot of events and conferences is that we hear a lot about projects to young people. So, everyone wants to do economic lessons to young people, economic comic books, economic education for schools, for students. But we are forgetting about old people. Like, we are living, especially in Europe, in aging society. So I am still surprised there is I am not aware of an NGO that has like classical libertarian values and specializes in doing projects to pensioners, like to people 60 plus. And I think there's like a great niche, and these people will be substantial part of voters they're already very big electoral group, and they will be bigger. So I think what we should brainstorm really, and I don't have some perfect solutions now, is how to stimulate projects to reach these people, to make sure that they also try to believe their ideas, even if not for themselves. These people are usually very concerned about the well-being of their children and grandchildren. So maybe through this way, they should be persuaded that they should not demand so much. For example, if they demand much higher, pension provided by the government, then someone has to be taxed. And who will be taxed? Their children and grandchildren. Maybe they don't want their grandchildren to be taxed more. So I think this is like one example. Another example I have in mind is, I think, LGBT community. It was captured, I think, by the left. Like a lot of left-wing political parties say that they represent LGBT community, while I think classical libertarians, they offer the same on the side of marriage or like well-being, but at the same time they offer also our less regulations in economy, which is also important for these groups. Actually, in these groups there are a lot of entrepreneurs or very entrepreneurial people. So I think there should be projects that promote liberty in this group. In Poland, important group that is also neglected are Catholics. We are still very Catholic country. It's drawing. It's the support for the Catholic Church is falling. Less and less people are attending church, but in comparison to the rest of the Europe, it's still much bigger. I heard about one project in Poland of the libertarian guy who was doing economic lessons for young priests. But this was, for a very small group. I think we need maybe projects like this so that priests also know something about the economy.
Okay, so old people. You were just talking about like reaching out to old people. I've got a couple of questions there. Firstly, how do old people feel about former Polish existence? The former times of Poland currently, and in explaining that, what's the current sort of political spectrum in the country? Especially with regards to sort of classically liberal ideas?
Old people feel a lot of nostalgia towards socialists. Part of course, this is not a unique group. Like there are people with different views, but there is a big group of older generation which feels nostalgia. But I don't think it's necessarily about socialist policies. It's basically about their youth. They were young when there was socialism, and older people feel nostalgia towards the times when they were younger. At the moment in Poland, we have the biggest party called Law and Justice, and their electoral base are also older generation. They do a lot of privileges and additional benefits for pensioners, especially before elections. Now we have discussion about 13th pension, 14th pension. I will not be surprised if there will be 15th pension this year because elections are coming in the autumn. What
that party? What is their sort of?
They are the ruling party this is their second term. They call themselves right-wing conservatives, but they are conservatives and traditional in like the social views. But at the same time, they are, in my opinion, more left-wing than some social democrats in Poland in economic policies. They did series of renationalization in the economy. They implemented new regulations, many new taxes, and they don't really like free markets. They criticize a lot Polish transformation. They say that we ruined the country, that Balcerowicz they blame Balcerowicz, who was Minister of Finance during transition, for everything bad happening, even nowadays, that it's all his fault. And the shock therapy was bad, which is wrong when you look at numbers and data and facts. Like even World Bank is saying that Polish transition was example of success story of transition from socialist to free market.
Are they doing that because they have such a user base of people, of older people, is it?
Yes, they strongest. They are very strong out of bigger cities. So in Warsaw, for example, they don't have majority in the city council. The mayor of Warsaw is from the biggest opposition party, Civic Platform. But in the countryside, in smaller towns, and in eastern, southern Poland, which is more conservative also in terms of church-going, some social views, they have strong support, and also pensioners. And this is big group and growing in Poland. So this is the main political party at the moment. Their biggest opposition party is Civic Platform. They have office on the other side of the street. As I mentioned, their leader is Donald Tusk, who was the head of the European Council for many years in the past. They started as classical liberal party in 2005, for example. Their program was very liberal: flat tax, 3 times 15%, deregulation, privatization, and then with every next elections, they were moving from classical liberalism more towards center left. I would say they are a very centrist party, which means that they think about attracting everyone, something good for pensioners, something good for younger people, and so on, which works politically. They were ruling this country for 2 terms. We'll see how it will work in these elections. I'm worried about something that we are observing now, which is kind of populist auction, you can say. So the ruling party is saying, we'll give 500 zlotych to someone, and the opposition is saying, but we'll give more, 100 zloty more. And I think this is a very risky game for the opposition, because the ruling party can always win this game. They don't care about future and sustainability of fiscal public finance. They want to win elections, and I think the opposition should rather focus on presenting some alternative vision of Poland. This is the biggest opposition party, Civic Platform. There are also some smaller opposition parties. We don't have at the moment a classical liberal party, like typical classical liberal, which is important. There is a small party called Nowoczesna, the Modern. They were quite successful a few years ago. They had 7, 8, 9% support. Now they are part of the coalition with the Civic Platform. And we also have some other minor free market oriented groups, but without any big chances to be in the parliament in the future.
Do you see a future where classic liberalism rises to be a proper another, like a sort of competition to the big parties?
What is important is that there are classical liberals inside big opposition parties. In Civic Platform, you can still find some classical liberals. You can find classical liberals in some other groups. So our hope for the future is that if opposition wins, then maybe we can somehow unite, and I don't mean creating new party, but somehow create platform for cooperation for classical liberals from different parties inside the parliament, maybe create some special parliamentary group that will work on deregulation plans, on reforming pension system or labor code, and there will be maybe 10, 15, 20 people with classical liberal views, but from different political groups. These elections are very specific in Poland. I think I'm really worried if the Law and Justice wins elections for the third time. It means that we'll move closer toward Hungarian model, where winning another elections by opposition will be much harder, where 90% of the media is captured by one political group, where state intervention in some parts of the economy is even bigger. So I am not really happy about the opposition, but it's kind of, at least something better in my view for long-term growth in Poland. And it also creates opportunity for thinking about new political parties. If we create this, if we stop this deterioration of institutional quality, violations of the rule that are happening now.
It's interesting. I've, excuse me, in talking to, liberals and libertarians for this podcast around the world, I've noticed there's almost two schools of thought with regards to how we affect change. There's the people that think you do it from the inside out, and then there's the people that think you create a parallel system and people opt in from. So it sounds like you're a create change from within type of person. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Like we want to be, we want to influence politics, media, business with our ideas, stimulate them, and we still believe that some classical liberal reforms are possible in this country. They happened in 1989. They happened later in late 90s. There were some reforms also 10, 12, 15 years ago, and we still hope it can be achieved. I don't expect, big classical liberal party that will win elections, but maybe small classical liberal party that will be necessary to create ruling coalitions and will push for reforms. This is like a long-term plan that many liberals have here.
So you don't see classical liberalism long-term as being a majority ever? I mean, I'm interested because it does pose a few interesting questions. Is, are there enough people who would, once they've heard these ideas, would they take them on board?
I think it will be really difficult to create a classical liberal party winning the elections because, we have people with different level of knowledge about, consequences of economic policies, and, educating them is sometimes just not possible. Like, it will require too many resources that people don't have. So it will be really hard to change minds of, millions of people. And I also think that if classical liberal party starts thinking about winning elections, that is, gaining 30, 40%, then they may have to, change some of their ideas to make them less liberal, and it will destroy the core values of the party. So if I am the head of the classical liberal party, my thought will be, if we are above 10% of support, maybe we are doing something wrong.
Isn't that the problem of the democratic system, though? That it incentivizes this. I hear what you're saying, and I kind of agree that you start off with good intentions, but then before you know it, you're trying to get as much market share as you can, and that means you change your policies. And you've already mentioned that the original opposition party began life as liberal. It sounds like it's happened to them. Is that what happened?
Yes. They decided they want to start winning elections, and we can say that this is the weakness of democracy, but I also don't think we have better system to solve problems, political problems at the big central level. So I think we just have to work in this environment and be successful in the environment that we have. We also have so big state that is like moving back is really difficult, like state in every aspect of our life. Majority of the EU countries have public expenditures at the level of 40-50% of GDP, which is really big. So one step back, like lowering it by 2 percentage points, will be big success. But the problem is that we also created a lot of promises and expectations of people, and it now we promised someone to pay pension in 20 years. So if we one day have libertarian government, the question will be, okay, but should we keep these promises? Like it was contractual promise. Like someone said, if you pay contributions and taxes, then you receive pension like this. I don't think we should also, break these promises. It will be really, bad for the image of classical liberals and libertarians. So if we have liberal government, then limiting the state will be very gradual process nowadays because of all of these commitments, expectations, promises that were made in the past.
Talking of limiting the state, just before we started talking, you mentioned a project that you know about, which was essentially decentralizing Poland, as you described it. Can you just talk a little bit about that? You mentioned something about 16 regions and getting autonomy. What was that?
This is another example of project that we supported financially called Decentralized Poland. And the idea was that we have so polarized society and so many arguments about some issues. So maybe we should think about moving these arguments to the lower level. That means regions, not necessarily whole Poland. So the idea is to, at the central level, create the possibility for decentralization. Because nowadays, in theory, we are decentralized countries, but the autonomy of the regions is very low. Most of the taxes are collected in these regions, then sent to tax office in Warsaw, and then money is given back to them. So we would like the system in which substantial part of the money is not leaving the region but is staying there, and there is bigger autonomy about tax system, about regulations, about all issues that generate controversies in public debate, like drug policy, abortion, LGBT rights, and so on. So the whole idea was to show how legally do it in terms of decentralization and enabling them to act. And then the next step, and this will be published in the form of the book, is to present kind of perfect region. So there will be a chapter about perfect classical liberal region, where I'm co-author of this chapter, and this is one idea, but there will be also a chapter about perfect conservative region, about perfect progressive region, about perfect Christian democratic region. So there will be this, case studies, what you can achieve if you have more autonomy and decentralization. And I think this might be one solution to polarization and big, social conflicts that we have at the moment in Poland.
Obviously, that my ears pricked up when you said that. But how do you then implement it? You need to basically convince the state to do it.
Yes, right? we need to convince the majority in the parliament on the other side of the street to do changes to many parts of Polish legislation to enable regions to be more decentralized. Also, the idea is to convert, now in the Poland we have 2 chambers of the parliament. So the most important chamber is called Sejm. It has 460 MPs, and then we have Senate, which is less important. It cannot block legislation, but it assesses the legislation of the Sejm, but without any strong veto power. And the idea is to convert Senate into kind of regional chamber. So instead of having normal elections like today, make sure that these different regions are represented in this chamber of regions, and they have also a stronger voice at the central level, and they're also defenders of decentralization in the future.
Do you not think? I mean, my impression of the 21st century is that we're moving towards centralization in many aspects of, especially politics and nation states. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think this is the problem, and it's also happening in Poland when you look even at legislation, especially under the current government. Actually, this is another problem I have with them. They are very for centralization. They like to have power in Warsaw.
Right, exactly. So obviously, my next question then is, what's the incentive for a state to decentralize? Like, how do you whisper in their ear, look, this will be good for you? Because really that's the only thing you can do in this situation is appeal to the authority to grant you permission to take some authority away from them, which seems counterintuitive, right?
Not all politicians are for centralization. You can find also some followers of greater decentralization in Poland. But I think we have also all these local communities and local politicians, which at the moment cannot do so much as they could do with more decentralized systems. So this is like important lobbying group, local politicians and local communities. And I think there is I don't think this is something that will happen, in 1-2 years, but there might be pressure for decentralization because also of this polarization. I think presenting decentralization as a response to big polarization in Poland, to all these conflicts that, people from Eastern Poland cannot talk to people from Western Poland because they have completely different views. Maybe we should tell them, okay, like live as you want to live in your region, and don't make people in Eastern Poland happy about their life, and don't disturb the ideas of people in Western Poland.
So this polarization you see in Poland, is that new? Or does this go back, hundreds of years or whatever?
It's quite old. Like, I think this regional polarization was visible in the previous elections, but it's growing. So the problem is that it's growing, and it's not only East versus West, but it's also big cities or biggest cities and smaller towns and countryside, which is another big division. I think we might also have stronger divisions between younger and old, especially with this demography, that older people may demand, higher pensions, while younger people might not be so happy about paying higher taxes to fund these pensions. So conflicts will be growing. So I see decentralization as the possibility to resolve these social conflicts. And the other benefit of decentralization is experiments. You can experiment more with different approaches to policies, to local policies. So and to create things that are now not possible. In our chapter about Wielkopolska, which is the region in the west, capital city is Poznań. This is the region just next to German border, very close to Berlin. We for example, proposed a vast privatization of land, of assets, but we kept some of the assets and convert them into non-profit organizations, like you have in US or UK. There are some, theaters or some cultural institutions or universities that work as a non-profit organizations. So this legal model is now not possible. It's not existing in Poland in terms of these cultural institutions, for example. But we decided, why not? Like, why not experiment with something that works in some other countries? And why not privatize a lot of land or assets of the regional government? Now I think central government will say, oh, you cannot do it. Like, we are not happy about it.
You mentioned the city countryside divide, which I've noticed even in my life that's growing, that the void between these two sort of groups of people is growing. I noticed as well, I was looking through some of the things you've written last night, and you've written about people versus the elites. Do you think there's, like, why is that such a thing these days? It's something that I notice is on a number of people's minds, and I think something to do with the difference between the countryside and the cities is also part of that same divide, the inverted commas people versus elites. What do you think about that?
I think this is very typical division that is strengthened by populists in many countries. So they use this elite versus people division just to stimulate kind of anger in the society and to create also conspiracy theories around these elites running the state. The problem is that we have party now in power which was presenting this division before they win elections, and now they have their own elite. Like they have they captured majority of state institutions. We have a lot of state-owned enterprises in Poland, and now the leadership of their enterprises are like members of the party, some colleagues of the party leaders. They will never get this job at the private market, with their skills and experience. But this is new elite. So I think it's not about, the populists usually they don't want to remove this division. They want to be part of the elite, like the new elite. But I think this is something that was present with us for many years. It's nothing new. We just have to live with it and present some, attract people, use other tools to attract people to non-populist, policies and economies.
Yeah, so I mean, it's real then. The elite versus the people. You mentioned that people use it to get into power and then they become an elite themselves. But it is a real thing, and I think there is a lot of distrust between your average, what you would call, I suppose, a blue-collar worker, and which often in the countryside you find more people that like that.
And I think again this works better in big centralized system, because if you have this discussion about elite and people at the local level, you sometimes even know this elite, because this elite is your local doctor, your local lawyer, your local entrepreneur, and these are not so anonymous people in Warsaw, like which in the room full of cigars and whiskey are deciding about the future of the state. These are elites that that you meet in your local grocery shop, or you go to the same park. And I think decentralization is another way to also lower the level of anger on elites, because you can go to this member of elite in your local community and say him to his face what you're not happy about it, or he can respond to you.
Yes, but 100%. I totally agree with that. What about the polarization that you currently see and the fact that it's getting worse? Do you think like the 21st century life has made it worse? Do you think the internet, for example, do you think social media, do you think all these kind of things, is that a myth that they're accentuating this? Like, why are we heading towards this point of polarization? Why is it seem to be ramping up now, which we've all sort of acknowledged?
I agree that the level of polarization is much bigger today, and I think social media is one reason, but I also think that we live in the best period of the human history ever. So, maybe polarization is a bit bigger than 30 years ago, but I am very happy that we have social media, that we have new technology, that now artificial intelligence is developed, and a lot of good things may happen thanks to these new technologies. So these are, I can say, little imperfections of our times, but in general, I think we should appreciate, and this is what people actually do not appreciate, that we live in so great times. I think this is not even a problem of social media, but also of traditional media. Bad news is really a news, and good news is not really interesting for the readers. So you hear about, some very tragic car accidents a lot in the media, but you don't read about millions of people that survived their trip by car to work or family trip to the mountains or the seaside.
Okay, then give me some good news from the Economic Freedom Foundation. What talk about some success? Give me some positive news about what you're doing.
I think one success that is very important to mention is that existence of the foundation is possible because of entrepreneur who invests his money in the foundation. And this is just one case study. Of course, Arkadiusz Muś and his company Press Glass is very successful in glass production, but we have thousands of these success stories in Poland, and they were enabled by Balcerowicz reforms, by shock therapy, by successful transition of 1989 in the website that was created by Civil Development Forum, a think tank that I mentioned, because the reforms by Balcerowicz were often called Balcerowicz Plan, but we also added another sentence that it was 38 millions of little plans. 38 millions is population of Poland, because after end of socialism, finally people were able to have their own plans for life. Like sometimes they failed, sometimes they succeeded, but at least they were deciding about their future and not the government or central planners. And so I think thanks to growing economy, thanks to successful entrepreneurs, we will see also more resources for activities like our foundation, for other groups. I see the professionalization of the movement or liberty movement in Poland. I started working in this business 12 years ago, and after 12 years, budgets are bigger, there are more people involved, we are more visible in social media. Actually, I read a lot about, which is sometimes the left is writing, this is the end of neoliberalism, The neoliberalism is dying, but they write it every year. Like with COVID-19, we are dying. With war in Ukraine, we are dying. We are dying all the time, and they are repeating that we are dying. So we are not really dying. We never died. And then especially in Poland, I often hear, when left is criticizing some economic policies, they say, "Oh, it's neoliberal approach to policies." So they see a lot of influences of previous liberal reforms in Poland in the political system, which is, I think, good. Like we still have a lot of liberal policies inside the system, and they survive over 30 years. I hope they will survive more. But we just started our activities. I hope also to observe small success stories of our partners. We are after the first grant competition, so actually we summarized our first round of grants recently. We just started another round of grant program, and I hope there will be like small successes more visible in the future.
Can you, just for the sake of clarity here, and this is something I want to know, I want to hear from you. How do you distinguish between classical liberalism and libertarianism? What would you say were the major differences according to you?
I call myself classical liberal because I am not completely against the state. I don't think we should have zero government or zero public policy. I think more about the limited government. So the state that is present in some areas of our life, like security, justice system, international relations, maybe some minor social welfare state, but for people who really need it, not giving transfers to wealthy people or middle class, which is, I think, pointless, but politically attractive, of course. And for me, libertarians, at least from the Polish perspective, a lot of them would like to abandon the state and make everything private, which I think is attractive idea, but we still don't know how to. We know how to do how private sectors work really well in shops, trade, some other issues, but I'm still not sure about private solutions in issues like police or security. I know there are concepts how to do this, but it's a long-term process. We should experiment definitely, but at the moment, I think our target should be smaller state, not zero state.
So what would your major contention with, say, anarcho-capitalism be? The far end of the libertarian spectrum.
First is that it's because it's very radical. It's really hard to promote and implement. And as I said in the past, for me, the little victory will be if we have, taxation lower by 1 percentage point, it will be like very big success because we have so big taxation, so big burden of the government in many areas of our life. So when I hear from some libertarians, oh, let's have zero income tax, it sounds great, but we have we then they should also show which expenditures we lower, which promises we'll not keep to pensioners, to teachers, to other people working in the public sector. So I think the strategy of classical liberalism, where you try to lower government intervention step by step, is much more has much bigger potential for success than doing events and research about zero government and moving from 35% of GDP to zero in a year.
Do you think there's any point in that end of the spectrum? Do you think even holding those ideas in place that maybe there could be I don't want to say utopia, but a world in which, for example, there is zero taxation? Do you think there's any purpose in people holding those ideas?
I think utopias are sometimes good. Good utopias are good. There were also socialist and communist utopias, and I don't think they were used for a good purpose. Actually, many people were killed because of these utopias, and I never heard about someone killed because of libertarian utopia. So I think it's good that there are some people that present this vision. This is some kind of holy grail, some ideal that we may look at, but
going back to your decentralized Poland idea, do you think it would be possible to have these kind of ideas in a decentralized way within Poland? So you could have areas where these kind of more, I don't know, I don't like calling them extreme ideas. I don't think they're extreme. They're more unlikely. I don't know how to explain.
No, I think they still will be very difficult to implement. I mean, moving to a completely private approach to everything. And there is another reason for this, and this is, I think, also difference between me and some libertarians. I also believe in international cooperation. Like, we live in a global world. We live in the world where there is Russia on our borders, which has invaded Ukraine and is a threat to security of also Poland and the Baltic states and some other countries in the region. So we need this international cooperation. And I understand this is imperfect, but I don't think for Poland and other countries there is better solution, for example, than European Union. And so if you are in the European Union, you even cannot lower taxes lower than 15% VAT, for example. You have some global restrictions, but I believe that we need this platform of global cooperation, because we don't live in the world of friendly countries. There was this conception of Europe of Luxembourg. So I saw these maps of Europe divided into 1,000 very little states, or 500 very little states. But the problem is that if we divide Europe, like peaceful part of Europe, and Europe that wants liberal democracy, free market policies, or peaceful approach towards international relations, we still have countries like Russia or China with dictatorships, authoritarian governments. And for countries like this, if they are big and strong, it will be much easier to play these little diplomatic games with, let's say 100 of these countries, than to do some kind of cooperation with stronger partner like NATO or United or European Union. So I am also a believer in international cooperation because it's necessary. We live in the global world, and
for me, you see, I find my mind doesn't sit well with the notion that, on one hand, I'm interested in a decentralized governance model, but on the other hand, I think that the EU would then be a good thing. Are they in contrast to each other, those two ideas?
No, I think there are many. For Poland, first of all, for Poland, joining the European Union was deregulation in many aspects. To make our legal system similar to the EU, we had to do some legal changes that were actually deregulating the economy, because it was so over-regulated after 40 plus years of socialism. So, and I also think that, single market is something really important. It should be strengthened, and there should be even more freedom in terms of trade. There should be more trade openness outside of the EU. But I know some libertarians and free market people in Poland who say, let's destroy the EU, or let's don't even do anything with this quasi-socialist union of European countries. But my approach is that we should actually be there, do something, be active, think about or work with European classical liberal parties in the European Parliament, EU institutions, and don't say, this is like a monster and you should not touch it. So I think we should think about EU reforms and not destruction.
It's a difficult one. I hear what you're saying, but I can't help thinking that becoming part of a large centralized organization is also dangerous. And I hear that you said that from socialism to the EU was a good move for Poland, say, but it's almost, I would think of that as out the frying pan into the fire, as we say. We have an expression, it was better, but it's not necessarily a good solution overall. If you could have chosen any solution, let's say,
I think when you look at the realistic solutions, this was the best solution. There is no better alternative, and what is also important that is to understand that the biggest benefit of Poland and many other countries in this region from being in the EU is single market, our freedoms of moving goods, services, capital, people through the borders. And it's many, many times more than EU subsidies. This is actually the problem, that many people in Poland believe that the biggest benefit are these subsidies that we receive for highways, theaters, museums, some other infrastructure. But this is not true. When you do calculations, these benefits from trade and trade openness are much, much, much bigger. So even if we become net contributor to the EU, there will be this point when Polish GDP will be higher, and we'll have to pay more than subsidies that are. It will be still beneficial to be in the EU, but EU should, and some EU followers should also invest more in presenting these other benefits, because maybe people will say, okay, now we are paying more, why should we be in the EU? And this bureaucracy, some regulations, I think this is like necessary costs of maintaining the single market. We cannot have one without the other.
What would be your long-term view of something like the EU then? How would you like to see it evolve or devolve, let's say?
I think, I see some directions for reforms. First of all, we should limit some expenditures, especially on the common agricultural policy. This is bad for agriculture and it's bad for environment. And this is something that is, there is strong lobby for this policy. This is one of the biggest component of the EU budget, but this should be reformed or removed totally. We should also think about bigger trade openness of the EU out of the EU. So we should return to discussion about free trade cooperation with United States. There is already a deal with Canada. We should build this, connection, at least in the, we can say, Western world. So stronger trade connections. And also enable countries to experiment more, so lower the burden of regulations that are produced in Brussels. But I think they are often exaggerated. When in Poland, some people say, this policy we have because of the Brussels regulations. Sometimes we have something called gold plating, which means that local politicians are adding a lot of regulations to EU directives, and then they blame Brussels for these regulations. We have it, for example, with e-cigarettes. Like the regulations here are much stronger than what is required by the EU directive, but the politicians were saying, the EU is forcing us to do this. And then when you are looking at the real, like comparing what is needed and what was done, the local politicians did more. They used the opportunity to regulate because of the EU directive, but it was mostly their local work, the domestic regulations.
I kind of asked this question earlier, but maybe we could clarify, is there any merit in that idea that it's better to actually not have the EU at all? Like, you're making the best of a bad system at the moment, in a way. Wouldn't it be better just to sort of get rid of it completely and do something else, or decentralize it? As I would see it, I would see that as a decentralizing move, would be to remove the central body of the EU and have more autonomy amongst the former constituents.
Mm-hmm. I don't see EU as something so bad. Like, I think there are some good things about the EU, and this is, for example, the single market. And I don't believe the alternative is like free trade in Europe without the European Union, which is necessary for existence of the single market. I think we'll have trade wars between European countries created by sometimes some stupid activity. One country decides to implement one tariff because there is some electoral cycle to and then the other responds with something else, and then we have this explosion of trade conflicts inside Europe. So I think of course, we are now losing because of tariffs and some trade barriers that are on the outside borders of the EU. But we are benefiting a lot from this free trade inside the EU. I would like to see more trade openness towards other countries. Of course, I also, it's another reason why I don't regard myself a libertarian, because it's not so easy when we think about trade issues. If if you produce something and you exploit children to do this, and because of this you can produce cheaper than clothes producer doing the same thing in Poland or Czech Republic, should it be completely free to open, or maybe it should have like a big mark that on the shelf that this was produced by children exploitation. I'm not so sure about complete free trade. I think there might be still some control if there are countries which exploit environment in a way that is not possible in the EU and is ruining this region. So this is not so like easy solution. I used to be like full open border supporter, but then I started thinking about a lot of something that in economics called negative externalities created by business activities. And of course, I am not happy if we have over-regulation on these issues, which is happening in the EU, but at the same time, zero regulation on polluting local river. I don't think it's a good, like this river, this is violating the freedom of other people that are using this river. And if someone is having a business in, let's say, some Asian country, which is polluting a lot its neighborhood and harming and limiting liberty of other people because of this pollution, and then is competing with companies that have to maintain all these EU or international standards that are present in EU, I don't think it's like a fair competition, and we should think about some ideas how to equalize this. So this should be we should have it in mind when discussing complete open border solutions for trade. I'm for very open borders for people. I think here restrictions should be much smaller also in the EU.
It's a shame we've only, sorry. I said it's a shame we've just started talking about this, because I know we've got to finish in 2 minutes, and I've just got so many new questions now. But maybe we'll have that for another time, because I know you have another appointment coming up straight after this. But I'll finish on. Thanks for talking anyway, and I'll finish with one question. It's a question we ask everyone on our podcast. I would like you to imagine you have a year-long sabbatical where money is no object. You have an unlimited budget to play with, and you don't have to worry for 1 year. What would you do in that year?
I think I will travel a lot to places that were visited by this YouTube author that succeeded because of economic policies, but also to places of failure. I would love to go to places maybe like Cuba or even North Korea to see with my eyes how bad economic situation is there, and later, spread these messages after I am back from this sabbatical. So I love traveling in general, so I think I will just do it for the whole year.
So that would be that would be for your own understanding, would it be? Or are you imagining that you would then like to take everything you'd learned and package it up in a film, or I don't know, something like that?
Yeah, I think I would definitely use this knowledge, but I also have a lot of fun by just exploring other cultures, cuisines, and countries. So I think this will be a lot of pleasure, but also very productive activity, and that can be used later to speak about what really works in terms of successful policies and what doesn't work. I will definitely would like to visit Honduras and these projects that are done there, the Free Cities project.
Well, thank you very much, Marek, for talking. Thanks for inviting us to your beautiful offices here as well, and good luck with everything you're doing.
Thank you.